I'm one with the Force is with me.
I'm one with the Force. The Force is with me. And I'm one with the Force.
Welcome to the Dharma of the Force, a podcast about the spiritual and philosophical side of Star Wars. If that puts you off, it's just words. And if you think that's all a bunch of mumbo jumbo, even better. We cannot widen our horizon and grow by never challenging what we believe, and we should always be suspicious of those who tell us what to believe. In some Buddhist traditions, listening to Dharma talks is a spiritual practice. It's not meant to give answers per se. It's an exercise in looking at questions and elaborating on them and finding the truth within yourself. So in that spirit, let us look at today's topic. Not allowed to form attachments. One thing that I feel some people have a hard time grasping is the non-attachment rule in quotation marks of the Jedi. I hear people more or less complaining about how restrictive and cruel it is to expect that you don't love someone. Am I supposed to not love my parents, children, or partner, etc.? And it's completely missing the point. Before I delve into the spiritual aspect, let me first use another more worldly example: spies. We've all seen the movies and heard the stories. Attachment makes you vulnerable. You can be blackmailed and you can be coerced into doing something bad to protect your loved ones, something that stands against your own beliefs. So you either don't have family or you learn to cut them off emotionally during your undercover assignment. Every form of attachment is a potential weakness that can be targeted. You don't have to be in advertising to know that, because attachment isn't limited to people. Often it's more materialistic, attachment to things, status, prestige. Once you let it define yourself, you're not able to let go and understand the impermanence of things. It will consume you. Family fathers killing their entire families and themselves because they lost their jobs and can take the blame to lose the house or car. This is of course a very extreme example of this type of unhealthy attachment. Or people killing their ex-partners because they can't live with the thought of losing them. Happens all the time. So how could Anakin have joined the dark side? That's not some far-fetched, unrealistic plot hole coming out of nowhere. It's coming from the same dark place within our souls, making misguided judgments based on our own egoistic attachment. Now for the more spiritual aspect, and Anakin even says it. Jedi are actually encouraged to love, even though he twists it to fit his sensibilities. Non-attachment doesn't mean no love, no feelings. It just means not giving in to the egoistic urge to keep something for yourself. It is releasing the baby bird you rescued and nursed back to life into the wild once it can fly. This can also be seen in how Yoda speaks about grief. Sorry if that shocks or offends some people, but ultimately grief is egoistic. The deceased don't care anymore. They are beyond that, and we are left with loss. We are the ones needing to adjust. Our attachment is ripped apart forcefully, no pun intended, and instead of celebrating their life and achievements, we now mourn our loss. There's a Buddhist story that fits right in. I'll try to keep it as short as possible without losing meaning. A woman who had just lost her baby and couldn't deal with it was told that the Buddha is in town and she should visit him for his wisdom and compassion. So she went to him, thinking he could perform a miracle. He told her in order to revive her baby, she just needs to go back to the village and knock on every door and find the house in which no one has ever died. She was happy and full of hope and did just that. To cut a longer story short, she came to realize that it was impossible, that there is not a single house where no one has ever died, where people have not suffered death and all the pain that comes out of it. And she therefore felt compassion for all those who died and made her peace with it. Whoever is born has to die eventually. It is this difference between compassion and love that lie at the core of the non-attachment rule. The Clone Wars showed very well how different Obi-Wan dealt with a similar situation. You can love someone, you can even feel sadness, but don't let it take over and define you. On a personal note, I have lost my entire family in recent years, and it gave me some first-hand experience I could have done without, but it helped me to grow beyond and develop a deeper understanding. I now feel compassion for everyone losing loved ones, and I feel sadness, but at the same time I rejoice for those who have passed through the final gate, those who are one with the Force, or however you want to put it. No matter if you believe in heaven, rebirth, or just the end of existence, one thing is for sure: their pain and worries in this world are over. And they live on in our memories and the stories we tell about them. The last thing they usually want for us is to let their absence break us. I know some people didn't exactly like the rise of Skywalker, but let me tell you this, as someone who didn't end things on the best terms with his father and didn't have the opportunity to make up, the final conversation of an imaginary Han Solo and Ben hit me hard.
Dad. I know.
Now, why would a Jedi or monk avoid detachment? As laymen, we often tend to interpret everything according to our mindset, and our mindset is often formed by our own cultural background. How can you forbid something and have strict rules? Isn't that too dogmatic? Using Buddhism once again as an example, because it closely resembles the Jedi in many ways, the way these rules are laid out differ very strongly from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Of course, there are many sects and variations, so please forgive me if I simplify things here a bit. But there is no you have to. It's more of a, if you want to attain this, you shouldn't do this, or it's best to avoid this. So to understand the Force and get strong in your understanding, you will want to focus on what is beneficial. You might as well question why an athlete won't be allowed to have pizza every other night, or call a strict gym regime dogmatic and restricting. So in my understanding, it is something a Jedi chooses to do, just like a monk would be living in celibacy to avoid temptation. As a side note, I'm once again speaking about true seekers of religious insight and not mere members of a religious institution violating their own rules as indicated by various horrible headlines and cover-ups. So please don't make the mistake to confuse the local priest with a begging monk in some remote mountain monastery. To put it into Christian terms for easy understanding, one would be serving God, the other one would try to become as close to a saint as he possibly can. And as such, they'd cut themselves off from the attachment to worldly things as much as possible. Not much of this has been explored in Star Wars canon so far, but I wouldn't be surprised if it would be similar to a comparison between the Guardians of the Worlds and the Jedi. I think it's a beautiful choice to use Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland, a place where Augustinian monks isolated themselves 1,000 years ago, for Acto. What a better place to display the mindset of the Jedi than a real-life location where monks literally detach themselves from the world to focus on their religious practices. So in closing, I think it's important to remind ourselves that words are just constructs that are being interpreted based on the culture we grow up in. We have to take a step back and not be too attached, pun intended, to our initial understanding and look at things from different angles. By doing so, we will be able to understand that the not allowed to love and form attachment rules is actually quite the opposite of the lack of love. It is the root of selfless compassion. Anakin didn't fall because this stupid rule got in the way. It is because he didn't understand its importance and put his own personal desires first. And that is great, and we all know where that leads to. If you want to support me or this podcast, don't send money. I don't have a Patreon. Find a charity of your choosing and donate. And do yourself a favor and switch off your phone, disconnect, and just sit in silence for a few minutes. Close your eyes and
Breathe. Just breathe.